Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. If you can hear me, give me a wave so I can see. Yeah, okay, great. It is great to be with you today. I am coming to you from Huntington, Indiana, which is northeast Indiana near Fort Wayne. And we live in a small town of about 17,000 people. It's the first time that I've ever in my life lived in a small town. And so I'm learning the ways that a small town works and ministers and trying to learn my context here. But my name is Scott Rainey. I am 55 years old. This context will be a part of what I'm going to present to you. So I feel like I want to be fully transparent. I'm 55 years old. I've been in ministry for 32 years. Uh, I've had a lot of different kinds of ministry experience. I was a staff pastor in evangelism and discipleship for 9 years of my life. I served as a lead pastor in Houston, Texas for another 8.5, 9 years. We served as missionaries in the former Soviet Union, lived in Ukraine, and worked all over 15 different nations of the former Soviet Union, and served in missionary leadership there for most of that time for 6 years, and then came back to the States and served in denominational leadership out of Kansas City and served in that way for another 6 years. And finally, we have now come back into local church ministry as a lead pastor again. My heart through all of those years has been for local church ministry. It's where everything happens. It's where people get saved, baptized, discipled, join the church, serve in ministry, replicate themselves by making disciples of others. And so local church ministry has always been where my heart is. I'll never forget the words of Dr. Gordon Wetmore, who was the president of Nazarene Theological Seminary during my first 2 years as a seminary student. What he said was, the purpose of the church is to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. I always understood that the purpose of the church was to make disciples, but that concept surprised me or challenged me, maybe better, that we're not just to make disciples, which is what we tend to think, or what I tended to think, but we're to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. After graduation from Nazarene Theological Seminary in May of 2001, I moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana, northeast Indiana, my hometown, and it was my home church, to serve as the evangelism and discipleship pastor. It was some of the most exciting days of ministry that I ever had. By early 2002, I had only been there for 6 months. I started a Sunday school class at the church. We called it God Seekers. I gathered about 10 strong Christians to help us, and had the goal of building the class through unsaved people coming to faith in Jesus and becoming new Christians. The Lord totally blessed the class. People were getting saved every single week. New Christians from the week before, say they accepted Jesus on Thursday night, would read the scripture. I would ask them, would you be the one to read the scripture in Sunday school this coming Sunday in God Seekers class? The 10 strong Christians that helped disciple all of these new Christians were vital to the class. And soon we had over 90 people regularly attending that class within a year. During that time, the Lord was increasing my call in my heart to lead and to preach, which is what I've always felt his call in my heart, and probably in that order, to lead and to preach. In April of 2003, my wife and I moved from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Houston, Texas as a lead pastor. I remember reflecting on that ministry in God Seekers and having looking back, I realized that while there was a lot of excitement, that Sunday school class began to feel like a church, and there was a limit to what we were able to do in terms of making disciples who made disciples. Somehow the focus, while it was there at the beginning, became growth. It became development of a class structure, development of how we function as a small church within a church. And I realized that all of a sudden, the desire that I had, which was to make disciples of unsaved people, establish them in their faith, help them grow deeper in their faith, and then become disciple makers, was limited by a Sunday school teaching model. I was now a pastor of a church in Houston, Texas. I was excited to begin and had great plans and expectations for the ministry that God had given to us. I learned a few things from my first year in pastoral ministry. I pray that all of these things that I'm going through will connect at some point to situations you found yourself in. One thing I learned in pastoral ministry when I began to be the lead pastor was that things were not always what they looked like from the outside. Leading an established congregation to focus on winning the lost, establishing new believers, and assimilating new people into the life of the church, and developing Christlike disciples that included making disciples of others, was not as easy as I thought that it would be. Membership and attendance numbers in the church that I had taken over as the lead pastor were far from accurate. Young leaders who were the hope for the older leaders in the church were not where they needed to be in order to spiritually lead their homes, let alone lead the church. I knew that I needed to find a way to truly make disciples who made disciples so that we could retain the new believers and see them become healthy spiritual leaders in our church. I was about 33 years old at this point in my life. I gathered together 12 men on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. every single Saturday. Here was our plan. We would meet for every week. I told them that I would give them my very best over the next 2 years. I would give them everything that I knew, everything that I was. I would pour into them for 2 years. At the end of the 2 years of more intensive discipleship, I would have them, they knew it, I would have them break into groups of 3 to begin discipleship groups with other men. The group went great, and the group grew in their relationship with Jesus until we stopped meeting. I thought that it would work. It was a failure. The group stopped, and not one of those 4 groups of 3 started discipling others. I was literally back to where I had started 2 years earlier, trying to figure out how in the world I would make disciples who make disciples in a local church. By that time, our church was preparing to relocate in Houston, Texas, to a new area of the city because of eminent domain proceedings from the state of Texas for our land, and we had to relocate. I had just started my doctoral studies at Houston Graduate School of Theology. In addition to the classes that I was taking, doctoral students were charged with the task of identifying a problem in the church studying and discerning a solution to the problem, using measurable outcomes to see if we accomplish fixing the problem, and then exercising a devised plan over the next 9 months of action, and finally evaluating the plan based on measurable outcomes. Whether we graduated with a doctoral degree wasn't based on whether our plan worked. It was based on whether what we did, that we could evaluate what we did. Before the start of my major project, our church moved into a new facility with a 15-mile relocation of our church. On my first Sunday at the new location, I was praying the pastoral prayer in the service with the microphone, leading the congregation in prayer, and the Lord spoke a word into my heart. It was a question. There have been many times in my life where I've sensed the presence of the Holy Spirit when I was praying, and I was able to pray with passion or direction. There were times where, while I preached, I had a word and I believed I was supposed to give it, and I shared it. This was the only time, one time and one time only, where the Holy Spirit asked me a question while I was speaking. It had nothing to do with what I was preaching about, and it caught me totally off guard, and I stopped praying. I didn't know what to do with the question that he had asked me. I stuttered, I paused, and I went back to praying. His question to me was this: what would you do if I sent you 500 new Christians today? I had absolutely no answer for the question that he just asked me while I was praying. This is not really a question of discipleship. This is really a question of discipleship and assimilation. That afternoon, I began the journey of wrestling with God's question. To be fully transparent, later that day, that Sunday afternoon, I prayed something very close to this: Lord, whatever you do, do not send us 500 new believers. We won't be able to handle so many spiritual babies at one time. They'll be lost for the kingdom. Please just send us 50 new Christians. I think our church can handle 50 new Christians. That was my prayer humbly before you today. This question, however, what would you do if I sent you 500 new Christians today? And this vision that I'm going to share with you became the heartbeat of my doctoral project. What systems would I put in place to be able to make disciples who make disciples? What was my strategy? What was my plan? How would I do this in the church where I was called to pastor? I'm going to spend the rest of our time today sharing where the Lord led me and our church. Any extra time at the end of our time together, I want to open it up for questions and discussion with you today. I hope that will work okay with the video feed that we have. I began reading with that question in mind and with my doctoral project in place of answering this question that God gave me. I began reading many books of people who wrestled with a similar question. How do we make disciples who make disciples who make disciples? I was particularly challenged by a book that was titled The Second Reformation by William Beckham. His belief was that the first Reformation that happened, initiated by Martin Luther on October 31st of 1517, was primarily a reformation of theology. While the Reformation stated that we believed in the priesthood of all believers, the church continued to practice as if the pastor was still the only priest in the church. His conclusion, William Beckham's conclusion, was that the church needs a second reformation, a reformation of practice. Beckham talked about the church as a two-winged bird. One wing of the bird was large gatherings of worshiping people. What we generally think of when we think of going to church, it's that gathering of a large group of people that everybody worships the Lord, and there's this sense of awe in God's presence, his transcendent presence. It's bigger than us. The very amount of people in the room helps us feel like, wow, God is so big and strong. If some of you had the blessing, I see a lot of men in the room. If some of you had the blessing of going to Promise Keepers back in, I don't know, 1996 or something in Washington, D.C., and that was the Million Man March that they tried to have there, I remember that awe-inspiring feeling, or maybe being in a huge basketball stadium with 10,000 or 15,000 Christians. You have this sense of, this is bigger than me. And that's one wing of the church, a reality of God's transcendent power that's amazing and awesome. And it causes you to bow before him in awestruck wonder of who he is. That's one wing of the church. The other wing of the church is small gatherings of committed disciples, a place where people can get really transparent with each other. They can ask each other tough questions and listen to one another clearly. It's different than the first wing of the bird, because instead of looking at the backs of somebody's head when you're together in a room, you're actually looking face to face. Maybe your knees are touching and you get to see their faces closely. And instead of the transcendent character of God, this holy other of God, you see his closeness. You see his intimate character. And you begin to experience him in a closer setting with people. If one wing, William Beckham described, if one wing of the church was underutilized, the bird would not fly well. If the bird only had one wing, it was lacking what it needed to fly. He went through in his book, he went through a short review of history of the Christian church. He described the early church with the apostles still alive as a two-winged church. They had bigger gatherings that would happen on the hillside beside the river. There was obviously one time when at least 500 people had gathered together, because it's mentioned in the scriptures where Jesus actually showed up and there were 500 people present. But a lot of times that early church was meeting in homes. And while a home today might have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 square feet, a home back then was much smaller. It would be a room of 10 people or 12 people. And so the church that gathered in a home was smaller than that. It was a small group of people. So that early church worked in two wings and grew accordingly. But the time in the church changed, and persecution began in the history of Christian church. Persecution began to come about. And that church in persecution became a one-winged church. They didn't have the large gatherings, because it was in those gatherings that they would be found out and they would risk being killed. And so the church became a church that was only in small groups. As you know, in history, though, when Constantine, the emperor, became a Christian, it became a time of church popularity. And that one-wing church that used to gather in small groups gave up that wing and became a one-wing church that was all about the large gatherings. Churches were built all across the Roman Empire, and the gathering of the large group and the awe of looking up at the pictures on the walls and the windows became the focus. And it once again walked along as a one-winged church. Since the popularity of the church began in the Western society, notable Christian movements through the next 14 centuries initiated small group gatherings back into the life of the church. They were trying to practice the need for two-wing churches. Some of them, you might remember John Wesley, who we kind of go back to as Nazarene people into the Wesleyan holiness history. John Wesley, while he preached to masses of people, he devised a methodology where those who came to faith in Jesus during his large gatherings would get placed into class meetings of 10 to 12 people. And then there were even smaller groups that came out of those 10 to 12 people that were called bands, and they were 3 to 5 people. And he tried to implement back into the church this second wing of small gatherings. Beckham challenged the reader that you can tell what wing your church focuses on by what question you most easily ask and answer. How many people attend your worship service determines that you are a large gathering church. Others might ask, how many small groups do you have in your church? And that determines that they're focused on that cell model, that small group model. For most Nazarene churches, we usually ask, when you find out what church somebody goes to, is how many people come to your worship service? Because our tradition, even though we came out of the Wesleyan holiness tradition, our tradition today seems driven by the large gathering. And it causes us to say, how can we balance our church with these small groups? And I would challenge you today that even our small groups, especially the model of Sunday school in a local church, tends to focus on becoming larger and larger and larger to the place where it is participating as a large gathering instead of a small group gathering. I began the journey with a goal of changing the landscape of my church that ran about 500 at the time in Houston, Texas, to a cell model with the desired outcome of making disciples who make disciples who make disciples in the end. Being able and prepared to assimilate 500 new Christians if they arrived at our doorstep on the spot, to answer God's question that he had originally given to me. After much study, here was my plan. This is not intended, let me just say this is not intended to be a prescription for your church. I don't believe that we're called to copy people in their plan. I do think that God has principles that transcend from church to church. And I pray that you'll be able to consider your own strategy of your local church according to the principles and God's desire for his church and your leadership within that church. But here was the plan that God gave to us. First of all, don't start a program. I never put anything in the plan that I'm about to share with you into our bulletin for our church. It took place all organically, quietly, behind the scenes. Our church board was aware of it because I shared it with them, but I said, I'm not going to ever put anything out there. I'm not going to preach about this until maybe 3 years into my time of implementing this plan. Our staff was aware of it, but again, this wasn't, we're creating a new program. Secondly, I prayerfully considered 12 men who were faithful, available, teachable. We say that they were fat. They were fat men. They were faithful. I could count on them. What they said they would do, they would do. They were available. There's faithful men and women that are not available. I needed available men and women. I needed people that would create time, not that they had extra time, but they would create time into their schedule to be together. And then I needed men that were teachable. I have to say that there are sometimes people in the church that aren't very teachable. They kind of feel like they have all the answers to what the church needs to do. And yet their own life, when they're confronted with something in a loving manner that isn't the way Jesus would have them walk, they push away instead of going to the Lord in prayer. So I was looking for fat men, faithful, available, teachable. I personally invited 12 men to come into this group with me. Again, I didn't say to the church, or I didn't have a bulletin announcement, hey, the pastor is looking to gather 12 men into a Bible study with him, because if I had done that, I believe I would have pulled in the wrong men. But I prayed, and I spent about 3 months praying, putting names down, erasing names, asking Jesus to help me choose the right people and trying to listen to him. I took the time to pray, and then I took the time to meet with them one at a time. I didn't ask over the phone. I didn't ask in the hallway of the church. I didn't text them. I said, can we meet together this week, one by one, over a period of weeks, where I sat down with 12 different guys and I explained what our goal was and what I was doing and why I was asking them to come into the group. Surprisingly and thankfully to the Lord for this, my wife wanted to lead a group of women. My wife is a quiet helper. She doesn't like to lead committees. She doesn't like to teach Sunday school. She wants to serve from behind, but she's the kind of person that I wanted every woman in the church to act just like my wife, because my wife was so much like Jesus. I wanted her influence to happen into our church. And here, I never asked her to lead the women's groups. She came to me and she said, Scott, I believe the Lord wants me to do with the women what you're planning to do with the men. And I hugged her and said, praise Jesus. I was so thankful. Here was our plan. We would meet every other week. We lived in Houston, Texas. There was so much going on in Houston, so many distractions. This is actually true of a small community that I now see also. But life was so busy, especially for parents of kids. But it was in Houston, even the traffic, it took 45 minutes to an hour and a half to get anywhere, even if it was just 4 miles or 5 miles. Life was busy, and we chose to meet every other week, to not have an end date. This was not for 12 weeks or 15 weeks or 6 months. This was, I'm going to gather these 12 men to meet every other week until the Lord calls me home or removes me from this church to be somewhere else in ministry, every other week. In time, when I felt like one of the men was ready, not all at once, but when I felt like one of the men was ready to disciple others, and when that person agreed that he was ready, and we believed that the Holy Spirit was leading that person to do it, I would commission him to begin discipling men on the opposite week. In fact, when a man began to disciple other men is when I formally said, "You're a part of my group forever. Um, you're discipling others." Was the official time when those people, so the original 12, I did not consider my group closed in any way at that. In fact, when one person started discipling others, I would usually ask 3 or 4 people from my group to join that person who naturally fit with that person, who seemed to have a good relationship there. And I would lose 3 or 4 people every time somebody started into a group. And it would give me a place to start asking people to come into my group again, because now there was space. And so that person would begin discipling 3 or 4, and they would add more, and I would be adding more into their group of new Christians that were a part of that. In other words, one week, someone would be discipled, they would get their cup filled, and then the next week, they would disciple others. So they would end up having a meeting every week, but they would be discipled, and then they would turn and disciple others. Within 3 years, I had 7 men discipling others, and my wife had 9 women discipling others. What it provided for me was different from what my first attempt in that church was, is I now had weekly accountability with these men, because every other week they were coming to me and they were saying, "Hey, I'm struggling with this issue in my group." And I began to then mentor them in how to disciple their own groups. I was teaching them now not only how to be a disciple, but how to be a disciple of others. This is the picture of a family. I want you to see this. I'm a parent. I've got 2 daughters. We've discipled them in Christ through their first 18 years of life. And now they're 21 and 17. There's going to be a day when my daughters get married and they're going to have children. And I can't wait to be a grandparent at this point, I can tell you. But when they become parents on their own, their kids don't become my children. Their kids are my grandchildren. My grown kids who are now parents are still my children. And I continue to disciple my children through the rest of my life. But now the parenting changes with my own grown children. And now I begin to, as they ask, "Dad, I'm struggling with my kids in this area. What do you think I should do?" Now my discipleship turns and I begin to help them learn how to be a parent who makes disciples of their own children. You see that? So that's the concept that we're creating within the church. I continue to parent my 12 while they now parent 12 other people within the church and new Christians, a mixture of those kind of groups. The schedule allowed for me to continually support the discipleship process in my local church, and it gave me continual accountability to the task. It was not found in my first plan. The goal was to raise up 12 men to disciple others, and my wife raised up 12 women to disciple others, allowing for the discipleship of 144 men. As soon as my 12 began to disciple others, the potential was for us to disciple 144 men and 144 women. By the 3rd generation of the same plan for the men and the women, 144 men being ready to disciple others is 1,728 men and 1,728 women with great intensity discipling others. literally at the stage of 144 men and 144 women being able to disciple others, I would be able to say to the Lord, Lord, please send the 500 new Christians today. The answer to his question for me had been answered, and I could give him the green light, if you will, to say, please send people to our church. This is exponential growth. My church in Houston grew slowly each year, but once we started this plan, this strategy, it grew with greater intensity because we were able to assimilate new believers into healthy discipleship groups within our church. And I want you to know that I believe that God sends us people when we are ready to disciple people well. I want to come to a little bit of time for us. We've got about 15 minutes left in our session today, and I want to open it up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see better the room. Now I can see you guys. Good to see y'all. Hey there, Jerry. I see you over there. Good to see you, my brother. What questions does this bring to your mind about a strategy in a local church to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples versus maybe what strategies we have to just grow groups? What questions might you have or comments? Either one.
And, my name's Keith.
Hey, Keith.
The question I have is in terms of when you work through this and develop on, what did you have to keep a consistency, to keep a doctrinal thread moving through it? What were some protections that were in that system?
Really great question, Keith. And I didn't mention that, so thank you. So again, and I'm a Sunday school fan, I just want you to know, but I want you to imagine as a pastor. Keith, are you a pastor?
Yes.
Okay. So as a pastor, sometimes we start learning what some of the problems are that are developing in the church. Maybe 3 or 4 families in 1 week come to you and say they're having marriage problems, and it feels like overwhelming in a moment. Or maybe 3 or 4 come with financial problems. I have an option as a pastor, and I can create a series of preaching sermons where I deliver a message about marriage for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or finances, biblical finances. I can give that for 3 or 4 weeks. But they're seeing the back of heads of the people that are in front of them. And there's no dialogue happening. It's just a sermon. If I went as a pastor and I didn't have the plan that I've just suggested to you, and I went to my Sunday school teachers and I said, hey, I want you to drop what you're teaching. I'm going to teach you lessons that I want you to turn and teach the very next week. I can tell you my Sunday school teachers would say, no, we're doing what we're doing. That's what they would tell me, even though I was the pastor. But in my small group, if I said to the men who were discipling other men, I believe we have a need to teach this topic, and I'm going to give you the lesson right now that I want you to turn and give to the 7 groups that you're leading next week. And for 3 sessions, I'm going to give you lessons on marriage. And every week, I want you to turn and give it to your men the next week. And I give this to my wife, and she does the same thing. They would do it. And all of a sudden, I would do the 3 sessions that I would preach on. I would do it through small groups, and 144 men and 144 women would get that message. So I just gave you what I do with the men that are in my group, and I'm doing this now in my local setting again now already. We don't have 7 groups going, but I have 1 men's group, and I've got my wife's group leading, and she has 1 group that's about ready to get started. So we're just started it 6-7 months ago, And there's no hurry. So I'm not in a hurry to start my men's groups, other than the reality that I need more because we have new Christians. I need places to put them. But what I do with my men is I say, when one man is ready to start, I say, I've just given you, I create a toolbox of lessons that I say, I want you to go through with your men. You don't have a carte blanche ability to do whatever you want. I want you to go through the same lessons that I've gone through with our guys, with you. I want you to turn and give them one by one to your group. And now I'm 9 months ahead of you. So you just begin from where I started and you follow what we're doing in this group forever. And there may be a time where I say, stop what you're doing for a moment, and I'm going to give you 3 lessons, and then you get back into it again. But this is the pattern that I'm giving you. And so I have them teach exactly what I've taught them. And I have all the records of our sessions. And so I've given them papers for it as we go. But when they're ready to start, I have a digital file that I've kept the lessons on, and I would be willing to share it. It's not the curriculum is not the key. It's the spending time with the men and the spending time with the women and making sure that they're discipled well. That's the key. But I can give anybody what I've done so far in Huntington, Indiana, which is about 7 or 8 months of working with our men. Does that help, Keith?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So they're doing exactly what I did with them, with their men. That's what I'm asking. I couldn't do it with my Sunday school teachers, but I can do it within this group, these small groups, because they'll do what I ask them to do within those small groups. Anybody else?
So Scott, when you were talking about subdividing, I'll call it that, you said 3 or 4 men went with that group. Well, that doesn't equate to 12 groups. That equates to, a fewer number. So how did they then subdivide? You didn't really cover that.
Yeah, so I would give, it's another difference between Sunday school and the groups we were doing, because Sunday school, let's be honest, teachers within your churches never want to lose any of their people to another Sunday school class, right? Come on. And but in our groups, I modeled giving up people. So when when one of my men started a group, I would give them people from my group that seemed naturally connected to that person. My group went from 12, maybe 14. I didn't do exact numbers, so that's not the issue. So 12, 14 men. I went down now to giving up 4 or 5 people total. I went down to 7. And that group that started had 5 or 4. Then I would automatically, because I've got men waiting to get into these groups already here in Huntington. They don't know it. They don't know they're waiting. They're not waiting like I need to get in a group. I know they're waiting. I've got a place for them. I need a place for them. They don't have what they need. And so what I do instantly is, as soon as I start a group, I start feeding people to that person and bringing people into my group that I have on my list that I know need a group like this. And so that group quickly moves. That person's asking, I'm feeding names to that person. They may meet on a totally different day of the week. That doesn't matter, but they're just on the opposite week. So I'm feeding into that group. I'm feeding more into my group. So I build back to 12. The only number I truly have, Jerry, is 1. I had 1. Right now, I have 1 man in my group because I have 1 man who's leading other people. When I have a second that I commission, I'll have 2 in my group. I have 14 people coming to my meeting, but one by one, I'm choosing my people when they're ready to disciple others. Soon, I will get 12 men who disciple others. Then I'm not going to continue. It's not soon, probably 5 years. I'll have 12 guys that are discipling others. And when that happens, I'm not losing any of those guys unless they die or they move. I keep those men at that point. But their men are still gathering. Now I have 12 guys trying to get guys. So I start feeding into their groups. And then the conversation becomes different. I start saying, hey, you're not just supposed to make disciples of your 12 guys, the 144. You're not supposed to just make disciples of them. You're supposed to make disciple makers of them. Don't forget. So now I start teaching them how to teach their men how to make disciple makers. So what do we do now to get those 144 one by one when they're ready? So I go back to the principles. When they're ready, and when you believe they're ready, and when they believe they're ready, and we know that the Holy Spirit is saying that, you now release one at a time. Don't be in a hurry. You release one at a time, and you start giving up some of the men in your group to go with that person. So you just literally are replicating over and over, so that at a certain point, you've got 144 men, 144 women. Like that's just those are numbers, I know. But it's the principle of what we're after. I'm not interested in the exact numbers, but the principle of getting these men and getting these women actually discipling other people. Does that help, Jerry?
Yes, I was trying to figure out your 144
Yep.
and that.
So that's just the statistical numbers. They're moving in and out constantly as you are developing your team. So it's probably going to be, I'm 55. I've got about 10 years left of pastoral ministry. I think I want to give this over to some younger people in my church. I've got 10 years. I think I will start having third generation. So my 144 will begin to disciple others before I retire at 65. That's where I'm at. I want to get that 144 stage starting to open doors for all of them discipling when they're ready, not in a hurry. But I think in 10 years, I'll probably have some third generation disciples, grandkids, turning to disciple other people, spiritual grandkids. Got about 3 minutes, maybe one more question if anybody has something that's on your mind.
Hey, Scott. My name is David.
Hi,
I
David.
used to live in Houston. I think I went to the same church that you're referring to.
Okay.
But I was wondering what's your follow-up? Is Houston still maintaining these discipling things?
Wonderful question. You said David?
Yes.
So it was Spring Branch and it became Living Word. Is that the church you were at?
Yes, that's it.
Were you at Spring Branch?
Yes.
Okay.
My wife and I were married there.
Okay.
At Spring Branch.
Okay. We know a lot of the same people. Yes, there is a dynamic that's interesting. I left Houston and I became a missionary, and pastors in the room will know when you leave a church, you've got to leave. So like I couldn't keep discipling those 12 men that I was working with. And so I charged them, you've got groups, you can choose a leader of this group, you can wait and ask the pastor to come and gather you, but he may have a different vision. The church did continue, David, to grow when I left. We were running about 750 when I left. With the 3 years of this plan is where that growth came from. It was little growth until 3 years. 2008 to 2011 was when our growth really took off. It did continue to grow because I think we had disciple makers looking for disciples. But after about 2 years of the next pastor's time, and you can go and look at our church statistics online to see it, but after about 2 years, the church kind of plateaued. So I don't know what happened with the vision, because it does take continual vision and continual nurturing to make it happen. Just like the intentionality of parents discipling their kids, discipling their adult children, and their kids discipling their children. It takes intentionality, right? And so if that intentionality is lost, there can be a change in the focus. And I don't know today if any of them are continuing. I know that that they did continue for quite some time after I left, which was about 9 years ago or 10 years ago, however long that was. No, longer, 15, 17. All right, well, it's 12:20, so I need to let you go and head to your next group. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Have a great time today.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you.